U.S. involvement in Vietnam was the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964. Reports claimed that North Vietnamese forces had attacked U.S. naval vessels in the Gulf of Tonkin. Though the details of these attacks remain disputed, the incident was used by President Lyndon B to obtain congressional approval for the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. This resolution granted Johnson the authority to deploy U.S. troops and engage in direct military action in Vietnam without a formal declaration of war. It became the legal basis for significant escalation, allowing for bombing campaigns and the deployment of ground forces. By 1965, tens of thousands of U.S. troops were stationed in Vietnam, and Operation Rolling Thunder, a sustained bombing campaign, was initiated to weaken the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. The Vietnam War turned out to be unlike any other conflict the United States had faced. The U.S. military was equipped for conventional warfare, but struggled against the guerrilla tactics employed by the Viet Cong. Knowledge of the terrain gave North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces an advantage, as they used jungles, tunnels, and local support to resist American forces. Despite superior firepower, U.S. forces faced challenges in distinguishing friend from foe, as the Viet Cong often blended in with civilian populations. This led to tragic incidents such as the Mai Lai Massacre, where U.S. soldiers killed hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians, further fueling domestic and international outrage against the war. While the war raged in Vietnam, it also created division and turmoil back home in the United States. For the first time in history, graphic images of war, including wounded soldiers, burned villages, and civilian casualties, were broadcast directly into American living rooms through television. The growing number of casualties and spiraling costs of war fueled widespread protests across the U.S. college campuses, became hubs of anti-war activity, and public figures, including artists and religious leaders, spoke out against the war. The credibility gap between the U.S. government's optimistic statements and the grim realities of the war led to a growing mistrust of political leaders. By the late 1960s, the Vietnam War had become a symbol of everything wrong with U.S. foreign policy in the eyes of many Americans. This public discontent played a vital role in shaping the decisions of policymakers and the eventual de-escalation of U.S. involvement.